It's June 2012 and a beautiful spring day in Dallas, Texas. But in emergency departments across the city, something strange is happening. A man is suddenly brought in complaining of sudden fever and muscle weakness, and he starts losing feeling in his limbs. Another woman comes in, previously healthy, complaining of memory problems. A man comes in, unable to walk, with intense headaches. Then more people come in, some falling into comas. Doctors and nurses are scrambling to figure out what's happening. And then the tests come back. It's West Nile virus. That year, in 2012, Dallas experienced a major West Nile virus outbreak, the biggest in any urban area in the U.S. Over the next few months, 5,674 cases of West Nile were reported in the U.S., half of which were neuroinvasive, which meant the virus infected the brain. 243 people died that year, and more continue to die from later complications. In the end, researchers estimate more than 1 in 10 of those infected from West Nile died. And 1 in 3 of those cases and deaths came from Texas, with Dallas as the epicenter. What happened? And why Dallas? In truth, the reasons are quite complex. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why this outbreak hit Dallas so hard. But there are some clues. West Nile virus emerged in the US in 1999 and has spread to almost all 50 states. Now, most people infected don't have symptoms, but 1 in 4 will develop West Nile fever, which is similar to a really bad flu. And a small fraction, less than 1 in 100, progress to the more serious form called West Nile encephalitis, which can lead to serious neurological impairments and even death. And those who don't die often experience lasting problems. And to understand this outbreak, we need to understand the disease ecology. West Nile virus is maintained in the wild via an enzootic cycle. This involves birds and mosquitoes, specifically the Culex mosquito. Birds are the reservoirs. They get infected and cause amplification of the virus. And the mosquitoes act as vectors. They transmit disease from one organism to another. If a Culex mosquito bites an infected bird, it now carries the virus. But it can't transmit right away. A mosquito must first go through a critical phase called the extrinsic incubation period, or EIP. This is the time it takes for the virus to develop inside the mosquito before it can be transmitted again. EIP is influenced by a variety of factors, including temperature and differential vector fitness, but all of these influence the likelihood of an infection spreading faster. And though West Nile circulates in the wild, if that infected mosquito finds a human instead, that can cause a spillover. Fortunately, humans are dead end hosts. We can't pass on West Nile to other humans, but we can still get very sick. Outbreaks can be framed with an important concept known as the basic reproduction number, or R0. One way to think of R0 is that it describes the expected number of new cases that one infected individual can transmit, assuming a completely susceptible population. And R0 is influenced by 3 key factors. The contact rate takes into account the more people someone comes into contact with, the greater the spread of infection. Transmissibility describes the likelihood that someone exposed to the disease who is susceptible will catch it. And the duration of infection means if someone is infected for longer, they can infect more people. A higher R0 value greater than 1 means an epidemic is more likely. And so, with this R0 framework in mind, let's go back to Dallas. The first potential factor is the weather. That year, Dallas had an unusually mild winter, the warmest in a decade. There were no hard frosts, which meant more mosquitoes could survive the winter. And at warmer temperatures, mosquitoes tend to have a shorter EIP, which means they can spread infection faster. Here, the Podgman curve models the relationship between EIP and temperature. As temperature increases, EIP goes down, though at very high temperatures it goes back up because survival of the mosquitoes goes down. What's unique about the Podgman curve is that it incorporates daily temperature fluctuations rather than just mean temperature. But still, the general trend holds. Within a certain range, warmer temperatures means lower EIP. And indeed, that is shown also in the 2012 Vector Index, which estimates the number of mosquitoes who carry West Nile virus and are infectious. That index rose much more quickly and earlier in previous years, and is strongly linked to the onset of infectious disease in humans. To make matters worse, Texas was in the midst of a major drought. Drought is a major driver of infection, potentially because it drives mosquitoes and birds closer to human populations, and birds may have weakened immune systems, making them more likely to have high viral loads. These weather anomalies may have helped to increase the contact rate, helping to tip the balance towards a higher R0. But it's more than just weather anomalies. Another important lever are population factors. First, host immunity is an important driver of disease. Outbreaks are more likely in newer populations with low immunity to the disease, in contrast to populations that have already acquired immunity. Lower immunity tends to happen in emergent regions, where the disease is relatively new, less people have been infected. And acquired immunity tends to happen in endemic regions, where the disease has been circulating. West Nile virus is a relatively new disease comparatively in the United States, and several models, such as the one here, show that it takes a much lower threshold to start an outbreak in a new population like Dallas, compared to an endemic region like Egypt. At lower temperatures, R0 is actually higher in an emergent region. A second population factor is rates of relative poverty. Research suggests that areas with high rates of relative poverty have a higher probability of death from West Nile virus. Dallas is an increasingly wealthy and urban area, but it also has some of the poorest communities, and diseases often disproportionately affect the poorest in our communities. This is a vicious cycle, which some economists call the poverty trap. This combination of wealth and poverty in Texas is one of the reasons the state is not only facing outbreaks of West Nile virus, but other neglected tropical diseases that are rarely seen in the US. Things like dengue, Chagas disease, chikungunya, leishmaniasis. In Texas, these demographic and socioeconomic factors play a big role in emerging disease outbreaks. Diseases like West Nile show us the environment, infectious disease, and human populations cannot be separated. They are intricately and inextricably linked, and this should reframe how we think about disease. We're facing a new reality in disease dynamics. What happened in Dallas is really just a microcosm of what is happening all across our world today. We live in a planet that faces the very real threat of climate change, and rising CO2 levels causes anomalies in weather patterns across the entire planet. Vector-borne diseases, like West Nile, may spread to new areas as territories become more hospitable to them. We're seeing this already with diseases like Zika and Lyme disease and dengue, all of which now exist in the US. In other parts of the world, waterborne diseases may become more likely with intense flooding, or drought and heat waves could increase overall morbidity and mortality. We also live in a world of intense social changes. We are experiencing record levels of human migration and mobility, some voluntary, some forced. But this mobility makes it possible for diseases to spread to new places, to new susceptible populations. Additionally, intense and growing inequality, both here in the US and abroad, continues to drive health disparities. This all has very real implications for the distribution of diseases in our society. All of this may seem like a pretty grim picture, but there's also hope. Because when we seek to understand these complex systems, we also can build strategies to prevent future outbreaks. To think about this, we can go back to the value of the basic reproductive number, or R0. If we find ways to drive down R0, we may be able to prevent or minimize the burden of an outbreak. If we recall, R0 is based on 3 key factors: the contact rate, the transmissibility, and the duration of infection. And those 3 factors can provide a framework for how to minimize an outbreak. For instance, we can decrease the contact rate by isolating infected individuals so they can't spread the disease to others. We can try to reduce transmissibility through strategies like hand washing, or by getting rid of the vectors that spread disease, like mosquitoes and ticks. And we can try to decrease duration of infection by using effective medical treatments to reduce or even cure disease. But that's not all. Our work must extend beyond just treating disease outbreaks when they occur. We also urgently must work to address these upstream factors, these climate change and social change factors that amplify the risk of disease outbreaks. To do this, we need to establish partnerships across disciplines and across borders. This is no easy task, but it's a critical one, and it's our only option. Because in a rapidly changing world, we must be prepared to rapidly adapt as well. And that time is now.